Okay, so when I first started this Bible study on temples, it was because I wanted to sort of figure out, okay, what about the temple that the two witnesses are going to be responsible for building once they receive their commission? And basically that is what I believe the little scroll is that's in the hands of the mighty angel in Revelation chapter 10. As I'm looking at temples in the Bible, I realized that there are a whole bunch of them. There are many, many, many temples. And the way that God has chosen to communicate with us is through the use of symbols and imagery, as well as through his son, as well as through the scriptures. And in the scriptures, there are certain symbols that tell in sort of a shadow form what he's going to be doing, or the plan, the big plan. And I'm going to be talking about this bird's eye view of the plan of God as it is sort of been manifested in the various temples that we see in the Bible. And there are two priesthoods that we see. One is the priesthood after the order of Melchizedek, which is a king and priest combo, and the other one is the Levitical priesthood. And each priesthood has its own temple, has its own form of worship, and the temples and the priests that we see here on earth are a reflection of something that God is doing in the heavenly or spiritual realm. So they're just a sort of a visual aid to enable us to comprehend something of the plan of God. So a few videos back, I talked about how at the time of Samuel and Eli, the high priest, when the tabernacle of Moses was at Shiloh, that the Philistines came and the Ark of the Covenant was taken into battle and the Philistines captured it. The Ark never again went back into the tabernacle of Moses. So the Ark actually went on a journey. And in the scriptures, the Ark both symbolizes the throne of God and the chariot of God. It's how God gets around. It's his mode of transportation. God basically went on a journey. And this journey ended up for the ark in the tabernacle of David. Okay, so it was for quite a while at this place called Kiriath Jearim, and then years later, David came and he took the ark into Jerusalem, and he built a tent. He had a tent set up, and the ark went into the tent. And this was on Mount Zion. Mount Zion is also equated with Salem and Jerusalem. So Mount Zion is where the city of David is located. It's the place that David conquered. Okay, he captured Jebus, the stronghold of Jebus. He got rid of the Jebusites who were living there, and he built his palace there. He had children there. He had the ark there, and it was on Mount Zion. Okay, and then remember we talked a little bit about how David acquired the threshing floor of Ornan, the Jebusite. Okay, so there were still Jebusites in the area. David had not conquered that place, and he needed to buy it from Ornan, the Jebusite, and he did for 600 shekels of gold. And that was going to then be the place where Solomon's temple would be built. It's actually the temple that was revealed to David by God, and God gave David the plans for building this temple. Every time God builds an earthly temple, or he wants an earthly temple built, he gives the plans to somebody. So early on with the tabernacle of Moses, he gave the plans to Moses, and the plans for the tabernacle were to be a reflection of whatever is going on in the heavenly realm. Whatever we see in heaven, Moses was going to build a tabernacle. It's a copy the writer of Hebrews tells us. It's a copy of the heavenly temple. When God chose to honor David's request to build him a house, God said, look, you're a man of war, so you're not going to be able to do this, but your son Solomon will build the temple. So the plans for the temple were given to David. Okay, and that's what the scriptures tell us. The Temple of Solomon is very different than the Tabernacle of David. Okay, and we'll go into that in another video. It's very different, and it's giving us a different message. It's telling a different story. It's telling a story that builds on the story that's revealed in the Tabernacle of Moses, and that's revealed in the Tabernacle of David. God never goes backward. Okay, he's always moving forward in his plan, and he's always giving greater revelation about where we're going, okay, in the plan of salvation and the plan of redemption. So I'm really looking forward to this video that we'll be doing on the Temple of Solomon and a little bit of the symbolism that's in that. And of course, the second temple was built sort of after the pattern of the Temple of Solomon, but had nowhere near the glory. And that was the temple that Herod then embellished, that Jesus entered into. Okay, but right now what I want to talk about is Zion. Zion was the place where the Tabernacle of David was set up, and I believe that David had it set up very close to his own palace because he wanted to basically make that his home away from home. He loved being in the presence of the Lord. And the very interesting thing about the Tabernacle of David is it only had an ark there. It was only the ark. And David could go and sit in front of the ark, and other people could too. This is like God is bending the rules here, where in the Mosaic tabernacle, ordinary people couldn't go into the temple, and only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies, and that only one day a year. If you went into the place where the ark was, you could die. Now, it looks like God is changing the rules. Actually, he's not changing the rules. He's giving greater revelation. Okay, he had to give revelation about his holiness, which is what the separation of the Holy of Holies from the holy place, and then the separation of that from the camp, okay, of the Israelites. He had to give a picture of his absolute holiness and the necessity of sacrifice to enter into a place of fellowship with him. When you get to the Tabernacle of David, the requirement is different. It's clean hands and a pure heart, okay? It's sacrifices of praise instead of sacrifices of blood. It's offerings of prayer and contrition. It's a totally different setup, and kings and priests can enter into this tabernacle. Now, the whole idea of a priest king being in God's presence is not a new idea. This goes back to the time of Melchizedek, who was a contemporary of Abraham, and which meant there was probably a temple or a place where worship was done. There was a worship center. There's a very interesting video that I came across that I'll leave the link for, that talks about the possibility that Melchizedek's temple was discovered. If it was probably most likely in the city of David on Mount Zion. I don't think that the Tabernacle of David was set up at the temple of Melchizedek or the worship place where Melchizedek worshipped. I think it was next to where David lived. But remember, where the ark was kept in the Tabernacle of David was not the same place that Solomon's temple would later be built. That was going to be built on Mount Moriah. And I've pointed this out in a couple of other videos, that Solomon's temple, which was the temple site where when Jesus went into the temple, was that same area, Mount Moriah, is only mentioned 2 times in all of Scripture. Once when Abraham was told to offer up his son Isaac, and the other time when David was to purchase the threshing floor. He already owned all the rest of the city of David. He purchased the threshing floor, and that was going to be the location for Solomon's temple. What's interesting to me is that you never read about the blessings of Mount Moriah. Okay, you read about the blessings of Zion, and later the Temple Mount and the city of Zion, or the idea of Zion, sort of became connected. But when you read the Psalms, okay, these Psalms, particularly the ones of David, where he talks about Mount Zion, he is not referring to Solomon's temple or the place where Solomon's temple would be built. He's referring to a different type of worship. Okay, it's not Levitical worship that he is referring to. Mount Zion is not the place of Levitical tabernacle of Moses type worship. The goal, the end goal for God is the new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven onto the earth, being the place where God dwells with man. Where there is no temple anymore, because God is the temple and he lives in this holy city, the New Jerusalem. When we read about David and the Psalms, and we read about Zion, he's talking about a kingdom of priests who are enabled to worship in the very presence of God. What God is saying in prophetic form during the time of the tabernacle of David. And remember, at the same time that David as a priest king is worshiping in the tabernacle of David, that there is the Levitical priesthood that is still being carried on at Gibeon, at the tabernacle of Moses. But there is no ark in that temple, okay? But yet the ritual is still being carried out, okay? It's rather empty, I would think, if God's presence isn't there. But there is a type and a shadow when we see these two different temples operating at the same time. This is a type and shadow that we're going to be looking at later on. Okay, so all of this is prophetic. Okay, all of this is prophetic. So let's just take a look at some passages that speak about Mount Zion. And I think the passages that I've chosen here predominantly come from Psalms of David, when the only temple or sanctuary or house of the Lord or courts or whatever is the tabernacle of David. Okay, it's just a tent with the ark in it. There are no blood sacrifices associated with this temple. Okay, so Psalm 2, verse 6, the first psalm that we see this spoken of is, "Yet I have set my king on my holy hill of Zion." Notice it doesn't say Moriah. Okay, he set his king on the holy hill of Zion. Psalm 9, verses 11 and 14. "Sing praises to the Lord who dwells in Zion. Declare among the peoples his deeds, that I may tell of all your praise. In the gates of the daughter of Zion, I will rejoice in your salvation." Psalm 14, verse 7. "Oh, that the salvation of Israel would come out of Zion. When the Lord brings back the captivity of his people, let Jacob rejoice and let Israel be glad." Psalm 20, verses 1 and 2. "May the Lord answer you in the day of trouble. May the name of the God of Jacob defend you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and strengthen you out of Zion." Okay, this is Psalm 48, and I'm just going to sort of read different verses here. "Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, in his holy mountain. Beautiful in elevation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great King." Okay, and then let's go down to verse 9. "We have thought, O God, on your loving kindness in the midst of your temple." Verse 11, "Let Mount Zion rejoice, let the daughters of Judah be glad." Psalm 150, let's look at verse 2. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God will shine forth. And down to verse 14, offer to God thanksgiving and pay your vows to the Most High. Call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you. And then down to verse 23, whoever offers praise glorifies me, and to him who orders his conduct aright, I will show the salvation of God. Okay, Psalm 51, verses 16 through 19. And this is the psalm that David wrote after he had sinned with Bathsheba. For you do not desire sacrifice, or else I would give it. You do not delight in burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. These, O God, you will not despise. Do good in your good pleasure to Zion. Build the walls of Jerusalem. Then you shall be pleased with the sacrifices of righteousness, with burnt offering and whole burnt offering, then they shall offer bulls on your altar. So he's talking here about the necessity for a sacrifice of righteousness, okay? And once you're righteous, well, then in that day, offering up burnt offerings were acceptable to God. But if your heart was wrong, what's the point? Psalm 53:6. Oh, that the salvation of Israel would come out of Zion. Psalm 65, verse 1. Praise is awaiting you, O God, in Zion, and to you the vow shall be performed. O you who hear prayer, to you all flesh will come. Verse 4, blessed is the man you choose and cause to approach you, that he may dwell in your courts. And we shall be satisfied with the goodness of your house, of your holy temple. And again, he's talking about the tabernacle of David. Psalm 69, starting with verse 30. I will praise the name of God with a song, and I will magnify him with thanksgiving. This also shall please the Lord better than an ox or bull which has horns and hooves. The humble shall see this and be glad, and you who seek God, your heart shall live. For the Lord hears the poor and does not despise his prisoners. Let heaven and earth praise him, the seas and everything that moves in them. For God will save Zion and build the cities of Judah, that they may dwell there and possess it. Also the descendants of his servants shall inherit it, and those who love his name shall dwell in it. That is in Zion. Psalm 74, verse 2. Remember your congregation, which you have purchased of old, the tribe of your inheritance, which you have redeemed, this Mount Zion, where you have dwelt. Psalm 76, 1 and 2. In Judah God is known. His name is great in Israel. In Salem also is his tabernacle and his dwelling place in Zion. And then Psalm 78 with verse 60 starts out by telling us how God left the tabernacle at Shiloh. It's a foreshadow of God not being a part of the Mosaic system anymore. He's going to leave that one day and be part of another group of people who worship in spirit and in truth. Okay, and we're going to talk about later on how Jesus views the temple in the Gospel of John. So informative, very interesting. So Psalm 78, let's start verse 59. When God heard this, he was furious and greatly abhorred Israel, so that he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent he had placed among men, and delivered his strength to captivity and his glory into the enemy's hand. Skip down to verse 68. But he chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loved. Okay, and he built his sanctuary like the heights, like the earth which he has established forever. And he also chose David his servant and took him from the sheepfolds. Okay, verse 68, he chose the tribe of Judah. Okay, the Levitical or the Aaronic priesthood comes from the tribe of Levi. But when he's talking about Mount Zion, he's talking about a different tribe. He's talking about the tribe of Judah. And of course, that is the tribe that David came from. Okay, he was a king who came out of the tribe of Judah, and he is a type of a future king who is a son of David who will come from Judah. Mount Zion is associated with Judah and the tribe of Judah and a kingdom of priests who serve God in a different kind of temple. Verse 69, he built his sanctuary like the heights, okay, like the earth which he established forever. Okay, this is huge, okay? And later on, we're going to also be looking at a sermon that was preached by Paul that goes into the whole idea of the Davidic type of priesthood and how it deviates from the Aaronic priesthood, and how the tabernacle of David is a better type of place where we worship, and how we're following after this tabernacle of David, which is going to be rebuilt. It's never said that the temple of Solomon is rebuilt. The temple of Solomon will never be rebuilt, but the tabernacle of David will be rebuilt. Psalm 84, how lovely is your tabernacle, O Lord of hosts. My soul longs, yes, even faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. Verse 4, blessed are those who dwell in your house. They will still be singing praise to you. Blessed is the man whose strength is in you, whose heart is set on pilgrimage. As they pass through the valley of Baca, they make it a spring. The rain also covers it with pools. They go from strength to strength. Each one appears before God in Zion. Verse 10, a day in your courts is better than 1,000. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of wickedness. Verse 11, for the Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord will give grace and glory. No good thing will he withhold from those who walk uprightly. O Lord of hosts, blessed is the man who trusts in you. Okay, up in verse 3, it says this, even the sparrow has found a home, and the swallow a nest for herself where she may lay her young. Even your altars, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God. Okay, so this is sort of looking forward to Solomon's temple, which would have altars, but the bigger picture here is that all are welcome. Okay, all are welcome in God's courts. Even the sparrow has a home in the courts of God, where she can put her children, her young. Okay, Psalm 87. This is a psalm of Korah. His foundation is in the holy mountains. The Lord loves the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. Glorious things are spoken of you, O city of God. Psalm 99, verses 1 through 3, and then 9. The Lord reigns, let the peoples tremble. He dwells between the cherubim. Let the earth be moved. The Lord is great in Zion, and he is high above all the peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. He is holy. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his holy hill, for the Lord our God is holy. Psalm 110, verse 2, the Lord shall send the rod of your strength out of Zion, rule in the midst of your enemies. Psalm 125, 1, those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. Okay, and I would encourage you, there are so many Psalms and there are so many places where David and other psalmists talk about Zion, okay, and Zion being the place where God's presence dwells. Later, God's presence will move from the tabernacle of David into Solomon's temple. Okay, and so these psalms are applicable for worshipers who will go into Solomon's temple. But I want you to understand this, that David was a king and a priest and a prophet. Okay, he had the threefold ministry there. And David came from the tribe of Judah, which is associated with Mount Zion and the royal priesthood, which goes all the way back to Melchizedek at the time of Abraham. It's an older priesthood than the Aaronic priesthood, which came later. Okay, so the bottom line is this. I mean, I could go on and on and on here. I could keep reading passages that talk about Zion, okay, and the significance of Mount Zion and the connection between the presence of God and Mount Zion. Okay, none of this is connected with Mount Moriah, which is where Solomon's temple was built. The idea of Zion transferred from the tabernacle of David into the temple that Solomon built, that God gave the plans to David to build. But Mount Moriah is never praised. Okay, there are no scriptures that say, God comes out of Mount Moriah, or that the blessing is found in Mount Moriah. There is nothing like that. And that is highly significant. Highly, highly significant that Mount Zion is associated with the ark. Okay, with the ark of God, which is the presence and glory of God. The presence and glory of God right now is in heavenly Mount Zion, where kings and priests can worship in God's presence before him. Later, we read about the 144,000 standing on heavenly Mount Zion. Okay, this is the presence of God. This is where the kingdom of priests worship God in something like the tabernacle of David. When the New Jerusalem comes down out of heaven, okay, after the old earth and the old heaven have been destroyed, God's tabernacle in heaven, the dwelling place of God right now, where his throne room is and where people are in his presence even now, worshiping him in spirit. They don't have their resurrection bodies yet, but they're in their spirits worshiping God. This is a tabernacle, meaning it's a temporary place. Even God is dwelling in a temporary place right now. Someday he's going to dwell in the city that has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. This city with foundations, the New Jerusalem, is going to come down out of heaven. And John saw this from a great high mountain. There is no name given to this great high mountain, but this will be when everything gets made new again. Okay, and God is going to start a new creation where there is no death anymore, where there's no decay, no sickness, no evil, no Satan, no nothing, where we will go to live with him. If we're a believer, we'll live in the New Jerusalem. There are other people who will be resurrected and go to live in a mortal kind of body in the new earth, or on the new earth. There's a distinction between those who live in the New Jerusalem and those who live on the new earth. In fact, we know that there will be actual nations, because the nations will bring their offerings to the New Jerusalem. But all of that is another story. It's part of the bigger picture that we'll be looking at later on. So the big point, the takeaway here that I want you to understand is that Zion is associated with the glory and dwelling place of God and the tabernacle of David, which is a kingdom of priests. And long after the Aaronic priesthood has passed away, there will be this royal priesthood who continues on even into the new heavens and the new earth. And you and I are a part of that because of the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ in our lives. We'll be looking at more of this. There is so much more, and I can't believe that this is not something that is talked about and preached on from the pulpits, because this temple system, if you want to call it that, is the real one. The tabernacle of David, the kingdom of priests, this is the real system. So anyway, enough of all of that. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you'll leave a comment. We'll be looking at more of this and really how it applies to an end time timeline. Haven't forgotten about that. But we have to understand some things about the tabernacle of David, which represents our tabernacle. This is our priesthood. This is our temple. And do feast days have any place in this order? So we'll look at that on other videos too. There's a whole lot more coming, so I hope you'll stick around for that. Till then, I pray you'll have a very, very blessed day.